welcome to 99 zu 1. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Anna-Esther Younes is a scholar of race-critical theories and whiteness studies. She uses psychoanalytic approaches and post-colonial theory. In 2016, she received a summa cum laude for her PhD thesis, Race, Colonialism, and the Figure of the Jew in New Germany, from the Graduate Institute of International Studies and Developments in Geneva, Switzerland. So that wasn't in Germany in 2015.
Definitely
yeah,
not.
Exactly.
With that thesis.
Yeah. Younes defines her work through the anthropological concept of researching home and researching up to power, and is currently an affiliate researcher at the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. She also holds the position of a lay judge, a Schöffin, this I didn't even know, Schöffin, at Berlin's Youth Court. Her academic and journalistic policy work can be found on academia.edu under this URL that you can see right here, or maybe there. We don't know where we will put it yet. Okay. Anna, yes, welcome again. This is actually my first interview that I have in a studio with a person in person since the Corona times, and I also heard you're not so fond of studio interviews. Is that right?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to present my work. I'm also a big fan of your podcast.
Oh, great! Thanks.
I out of actually many reasons, in particular because I think it's very important to have alternative media, and what you and your friend are doing is, I think, very important work.
Cool, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. So what was the question? Yeah, I'm a bit shy. I don't like to be in front of the camera. Okay. And it's been some time I've been in front of a camera in a studio.
Yeah, right. I think the first time I saw you was in 2015, the Deutsche Welle interview?
14. During the war, yeah.
That's at least the last time I saw you also.
Yeah, that was also the last time I was invited ever.
Right. So, Anna, why are we doing this in English and not in German?
I think one of the reasons why you invited me is to tackle, this is what you're generally doing with this podcast, to tackle important issues in politics as they appear now in our contemporary time. And anti-Semitism, or the discourse around anti-Semitism, is one of these pretty emotive and politically charged discussions. So the reason why I wanted this to be in English is, I think for the past 10 to 15 years, I've been working on this problématique, as you say in French, or this problem in general. And it's incredibly difficult. It's becoming more and more difficult in Germany to have an alternative critical discourse that looks at anti-Semitism at the same time that it looks at racism and colonialism in Germany without being smeared, publicly destroyed, or losing literally your job, right? It's a very bourgeois way of ruling this country. And I do think that speaking in English not only widens the discourse, it kind of takes it out of this epistemic nationalism that Germans have, or that has come to fruition in Germany in a way of, we can only speak about this problem because we're Germans, we were the perpetrators, and that is, the end of the sentence in a way, almost most of the time. And a lot of people outside of Germany don't really understand what's happening here. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, because of this structural and political pressure not to allow alternative discourses to appear, there's kind of like an ideological vacuum in a way, right? I think it's very important to internationalize this discussion, to have this discussion with the post-colonial, well, it's not necessarily post, but with the post-colonial world, as well as with, anyone else, in fact. I think this topic should be an international subject, just like the Shoah or German or European colonialism has always been an international subject. And I think keeping it within the realms of German as a language, which is quite an important factor also for German racism. This is how German racism shows itself, by insisting on a certain language, which is German and not any other language. We can break that. That's it.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, the last thing that I mean, of course, we're going to talk about the essay that I just mentioned. The last thing that I saw and recently read of you was a recent debate with Suzanne Naiman. She's one of the... Naiman?
Susan. Yeah,
Susan, sorry, yeah. And she's one of the signatories of the Initiative GG 5.3. And you had like... Can you first explain to the audience what is this Initiative GG 5.3? Can you just repeat that quick?
I mean, it was an initiative by, I don't know exactly anymore how many signatories, I would need to look that up, but you can also find it online if you Google it, of important cultural institutions or heads thereof or directors that petitioned the Bundestag to rethink their BDS motion or anti-BDS motion of the Bundestag, of the German government and parliament, in fact. So because people have understood, and I think one of the many moments when that became clear was for Susan, it was Peter Schäfer's the smear campaign against Peter Schäfer, the former head of the Jewish Museum in Berlin, who resigned because the Jewish Museum twittered a Taz article that tried to kind of at least make the motion. It was not a radical article. It was just a very liberal article that basically stated, well, maybe we should be able to talk about BDS and what is happening in Palestine. And connect that to the discussion of anti-Semitism in Germany. So it was not at all a radical statement. They literally just twittered this article. And after that, I think a couple of weeks later, Schäfer had to go. And that stirred up a lot of commotion within the upper class of elite institutions, in a way, right? Of cultural institutions and educational institutions in Germany. And then there was the Achille Bembe case, obviously, which was the next trigger. And so basically shortly after Bembe's case actually became also internationally blown up, right? This is I mean, the reason why we discussed Bembe in Germany even was because there was pressure from the outside. So that is what they did. They wrote a petition, but at the same time, what they did was signaling that in a very liberal notion, again, that we should be able to discuss BDS, but we're against BDS. So it's this very, I don't know, Hulk Hogan,
always making clear
it's kind of like that, It's kind of like the cop and the black person. We have to listen to both of them in a way. And this is now, we're having moderation here, something like that.
That's actually the millionaire.
That's
He's
the
a capitalist.
That's the capitalist. Then it's perfect. I brought Sigmund Freud too.
Yeah, great.
Hi.
I mean, speaking of Freud, one of the things that caught me in that interview was that the interview itself, or the debate, was quite heated, I would say, and you talked a lot about trauma and memory politics and power, and like basically discussed the way in which. This idea of the traumatized German, that the guy that is, or the people that are basically traumatized by their own doing of the Shoah, how that is always like more or less the frame, or should not be the frame of the way that we discuss this topic. So why was this debate so controversial in that moment? What do you think about that?
I mean, there are many reasons why it was controversial, I think, or why, it was quite heated. I don't think it's controversial, but I think it was quite heated. I mean, we've been kind of put in conversation by this journal of genocide studies as a representative of this initiative, an American Jewish representative of this initiative with German passport and an Israeli passport. And me as someone who has researched this subject, right? So what kind of made it a bit difficult to argue, or what was the difficulty in having this debate right now, I think was that a lot of these topics surfaced again, and in our conversation, namely this ideology that Germans suffer and are the actual traumatized people. And out of that, I think there are two main discourses or two main tropes coming out. One is this German exceptionalism discourse, and one is German shame, and out of that you have German trauma and all of that stuff. They are connected. They live only in conjunction, these two topics or these two realms of discussion. They both kind of hinge upon the fact of the Shoah being the founding moment for a new Germany, and as I argue in my article as well, by extension also of a new Europe. And you see this also on a European scale, these debates. But it always taps into this narrative that whatever happened was exceptional, right? Not only that, it was exceptional.
Singular, yeah.
It's exactly the singularity thesis that also became a contented subject matter in this conversation in a way, which kind of spirals into these debates of having a second historians dispute, for instance, right? So yeah, I think I got lost right now a little bit, but I think it hinges upon these two things, right? So German exceptionalism on the one hand, which kind of argues because Germany committed the Shoah, there is a certain, and because it hinges upon the fact that there is no comparable other atrocity that we can name, Germany therefore has to pay tribute to the past and undo whatever it has done, right? That is one argument. And the other argument then is that of German shame, which is obviously tightly connected to that, which is why they don't live independently from each other, but they sometimes appear as independent, right? Like the liberal notion would be like, we are also full of shame, whereas I think a more government notion would be like, we have to bear the responsibility of the past. And we're the only ones able to do that because we really looked at it and we're Germany. So once they were the experts on anti-Semitism, and now they are the experts on anti-Semitism, right?
Right.
So I think that was part of the contentious debate, and I try to argue against that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's this quite perverse notion of the perpetrator of the crime, at least in a national sense, being in the end the one that has the ultimate authority on the crime because he learned from his mistakes, or she learned from her mistakes, and can now dictate what that discourse is to everybody else, basically.
Right.
I always found that so weird, because normally you would never have this kind of approach if you talk about other crimes, for example. Just because someone killed someone, this person does not automatically become an authority on murder, let's say, and gets then to tell everybody else, how to not kill people.
Well, there's a nice series which is called How to Get Away with Murder, which I actually quite like. But
that's just my 2 cents.
No, you're right. But maybe I would also contest that. I think it's quite. That is one of the reasons why I'm against this notion of German exceptionalism, because every nation state, it's inbuilt in nationalism that you have an exceptionalist clause in there, right? Every nation has this original myth of how it was, how it came into being, right? As opposed to any other people in the world. But I think what is quite fascinating about this discourse is that people have come to accept it on an international level, no matter where you go today in the world.
Even in the US, they say, "Oh, we should have worked on slavery like the Germans worked on the Holocaust."
Yeah, Suzanne Naiman also wrote a book about it, for instance, right? So it's there. There's an ideological narrative that literally works through this notion that Germany has been redeemed, right? So now we do know that Germany did not really undo many of the structures that came out of fascism, right? I mean, we had an entire generation that was, revolting against that, kidnap people, etc. So we do know that these structures have not been undone. But I think another podcast that I listened to, I think it was Sebastian Friedrich, this notion of we have a politically PC or a political PC public discourse right now, I think generally
PC,
politically correctness discourse. Yeah, sorry. In the world, or maybe not in the world, but maybe, I mean, I don't know, in Europe definitely, and in the Western world. And at the same time, we still have kind of, the realpolitik, so the hardcore politics, are still defined by capital and politics. Whereas on the other hand, in public discourse, we narrate emancipation, progress. We even speak about racism now in Germany, right? So there's all of this, symbolic talk in the public realm. But at the same time, we kind of continue upon or with the same structures that have already facilitated colonialism, imperialism, genocide, and now facilitate apartheid and colonialism in the Middle East.
And then you do write in this, you don't write. I read that you said in this debate that Germany today rather controls the narrative of trauma instead of being controlled by trauma, right? So you kind of try to turn that concept around, where Germans always point at, we are so traumatized and this is why we're doing what we're doing, and actually bring some kind of agency into this basically from the German side. So what do you mean by that? It rather controls the narrative of trauma.
I mean, I think out of this kind of German shame, German exceptionalism trope, very quickly, and we also see this emerge, and this is not in the paper, but we have a trauma discourse, a psychologizing discourse that generally developed at the same time that neoliberalism kind of came onto the stage. Obviously, slightly later, let's put it that way. And how this is being used now for narrating politics and for narrating the politics of, and let's not kid ourselves, we live in one of the strongest and wealthiest countries in this world. That's it. And now the former perpetrator is doing because it's traumatized, right? Before that, Europeans wouldn't listen because they don't care about the trauma of the other. And now they don't care about the trauma of the other because they are traumatized, right? I mean, and this is, I think, the perversity. And as someone who really likes Freud, not only Freud, even like a lot of other people too. I mean, I don't have a Frantz Fanon finger puppet, but maybe one day I will have that. Trauma essentially is, according to Fanon, according to Freud, and there's many different definitions of what trauma is. So there's no clear definition in the psychoanalytic community that defines, or kind of rests on, okay, this is trauma and nothing else. You can obviously always stretch every concept. But I think one of the prime understandings that in practice people hold on to is that the ego is unable to foresee, understand, or defend itself against whatever outside force that is happening right now, right? So if I look at German vulnerabilities today, I wonder what they are conquered by. What is that outside force that imposes itself on the German psyche that supposedly traumatizes them, So far, I didn't get any good answers, but maybe you have one.
No, I don't think I have one, but I do know what some of the answers would be. I mean, one of the answers would be like learning in school as a small kid already what kind of horrors your ancestors created.
Well, but that's not trauma. Like if I teach you,
you get traumatized by learning stuff about what happened.
I mean, this is really perverse. Like when I hear this, I become emotionally very affected by that, quite angry actually, because that also means if we think that to its end, this narrative, right? It means that every generation, every white American that learns about slavery, chattel slavery,
they should be
right?
traumatized.
They're all traumatized because they learn about that in school.
Yeah, we should take care of them because they're all traumatized.
Exactly.
I mean, and also we should find a lot of Germans that are traumatized about what happened with the Herero people, for example, right? But we don't really talk about this ever in this way.
Right. And where does the trauma of the Sinti and Roma, of the gays, of, obviously the Jews, where does the trauma of all those who've actually been genocidally or systematically killed and erased, where does that trauma then go, right? So it also kind of pits two narratives against each other, where even the language of trauma, whether that is in practice as a practicing psychologist, or even in the public realm, we lose the definition of trauma, because then everyone is being traumatized. Right? And we see this language of trauma generally, right? I mean, it's not just, but this is a language of trauma that has been sanitized and co-opted by a state. So I would even go as far as saying this is part of nation branding.
It's a power structure ultimately, because
it comes from above.
Exactly, and I mean, it also gives you power because it gives you some kind of authority based on your trauma that you receive.
Exactly, and that is how you brand the nation. This is how you sell yourself on an international, podium, where obviously there's a certain sense of respectability politics that you have to adhere to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Okay, let's get to that article.
The nitty-gritty part, yeah.
The article is called "Fighting Anti-Semitism in Contemporary Germany." It is from fall last year, so it's actually not even a year old. And in this text, you provide a very detailed historical and critical analysis on a phenomenon that you call the war on anti-Semitism. I mean, this is something that will be probably already a bit triggering for some people to have that together, but to have the war anti-Semitism in one phrase. But I really like this phrase because it really quite well describes what's going on. So could you give us like a short overview on like what is that war on anti-Semitism, and how did you get to this idea that is actually
what's happening?
That's what's happening, exactly.
I was done with my PhD in 2015, and I think a month before, or maybe 2 months or 3 months, I don't remember, very much at the very end, I read an article. It was a journalistic piece about the war on terror and the war on drugs, and it detailed, I can't find it anymore, unfortunately. Okay. But I was quite, I really liked reading it because it detailed the historical convergences of these two colonial/imperial structural power, wars of power, basically, right? And then I realized, reading through it, that everything I've written until then, until 2015, is basically the same thing, just in one country. I mean, I just focused on Germany, right? And Germans have been talking about fighting anti-Semitism, der Kampf gegen den Antisemitismus. It's kind of like it's like a mantra, right? It's like this mantra. The guy is already on the couch. That, you know, like if he would go into therapy right now, he would constantly talk about, but how can we stop it? How can we talk some sense into all of these refugees and Arabs and Muslims and, you know, in particular Palestinians, obviously, that are somehow almost like the original instigator of this new type of anti-Semitism,
Imported
anti-Semitism.
Exactly.
And I was always struck, I mean, you grew up here too, you're also Palestinian. I was always struck by this these very emotive reactions that you would get as a young child, as a grown-up, to issues around Palestine, right? There was, you could not even, whatever a rational debate means, at the end of the day, it does not really exist, right? Or objective debates don't exist. But there is a slight difference, always a matter of degree, right? And the matter of degree around anti-Semitism in Palestine, there's no leeway. You know, It's like immediate explosion.
Right.
You're immediately an anti-Semite. And there's immediately this feeling that you also get that someone is fighting you by all means possible. Yes. I mean, I literally had one of my co-students once tell me, she screamed at me, I'm going to go and join the IDF if necessary, and I'm going to defend this country. You know, so there's this white German lady who's anti-Deutsche at that time, I don't know if she still is, who's like literally telling me, who was trying to have an actual historical, political, factual conversation with her in front of everyone else. It was kind of like a zoo, like a show. Yeah. Like that, actually. It was like a gladiator fight at university. That she would basically go and kill me, right? And no one said anything, right? It was just like part of the conversation. It was part of the discussion. Mm-hmm. And this is how we grew up here, right? I mean, I don't know how.
Yeah, no. I totally agree. Like, I mean, I didn't have that particular instance, but like, I remember very vividly, I mean, some experiences I already talked on this podcast about, but one thing that just popped to my head was that I was on holidays with my mom. My father was not even there. So the Palestinian side of the family was not with us. It was my mom, my sister, and me. And we were in some kind of, that was in Turkey or one of these hotels, a resort. And there was this German guy, and he was actually with two kids, and I was playing with the kids, and they were actually always quite friendly to us. And we had a lot of fun. And at some point it comes out that my father's Palestinian, I'm Palestinian, and my mom, of course, also identifies, or at least relates to this issue a lot. This guy starts fighting my mom on whether or not Palestine ever existed in the first place. And
How old were you?
I was like 8 or 9, right? So. And this guy like goes back to like 2,000 years, and then it was called Judea. It wasn't called Palestine. Blah blah blah. All, of course, completely like bullshit. But yeah, that really and the viciousness and the aggression also, and especially because you didn't see that before. Like this guy was not an aggressive guy, but that topic triggered him, and he was immediately in fight mode. Yeah.
Right. It's just the average dude or woman around the corner. It's not like...
Yeah. It was not. This was not a political activist. I think even this guy was a bus driver or something. He was also not a police guy or someone in the army. It was just a normal guy. I mean, yeah. It was...
And I think that is one of the reasons why I also wanted to write about it, because that is one feature of German racism that is so often overlooked, right? We've pumped millions of euros and German marks back then into fighting... right-wing extremism, right? The neo-Nazi, the figure of the neo-Nazi, which still exists, by the way. And it's kind of enjoying a new revival, obviously. Well, it's not new, they've always been there. But I think with the new liberalization of it, there's a certain, moment here. Anyways, but it's just the everyday person around the corner, right? It could be your teacher, it could be your friend of a couple of years and you never talked about it, or the bus driver, or just the person lying on the beach right next to you, and they just explode immediately. And then once this research started in 2011 for me, for 4 years I've been listening, or 5 years in total, I've been listening to the fight against anti-Semitism, the fight. I mean, so many times the language that is deployed in the seminars that I observed, as well as the policy papers, obviously, that are being published, and what our government or politicians are right now pushing as a new German agenda, is a rhetoric of war. And again, fast forward to almost me finishing the PhD, I realized, why am I calling this fighting anti-Semitism if everybody actually talks about war? Because it is war. And if we look at the conquest of the Middle East, and this is related to the conquest of the Middle East. I'm not just talking about, Palestine right now, although this is not in the paper, but Orientalism has been a driving force way before 2000, way before, we say the war on terror started, right? There's been considerable time, let's say 60 years at least, or 50 years, 70s, and the oil crisis, where the Middle East has been branded as a place of terror, of unknowability, of danger, and it always also hinged on the political position of Israel, obviously, and Israeli politicians knew how to use that trope, obviously, right? It's also no rocket science. We all know that Israeli politicians have pumped a lot of effort into reframing the colonization of Palestine as a matter of fighting for survival that is defensive and not aggressive. Yeah.
And you even say that the war on terror merged considerably with what you call and you even claim that the war on terror merged considerably with the war on anti-Semitism, right? So
right.
Where did you see that? And how are those related? They're not different things?
I mean, race generally cannot be defined as something that has just one meaning, right? Whatever race is, actually. What I observed, obviously, is that although I focused on the war on anti-Semitism and on this particular narrative that is kind of mobilized against Muslims or Arabs or the Oriental, the Semite, I think, in general, I should have called it, it's a war on Semites, actually, but this is not how it appears. It appears as a war on anti-Semitism, but it feels like it's a war against Semites, I would say. So when I came into my field research and when I started reading all these policy documents, there was Iran everywhere, Hamas was everywhere, Ahmadinejad was everywhere, right, when he went to Colombia as well. And so this whole debate, and then Israel. And you see slowly but surely these discourses merging onto one figure, which is the Oriental or / the Semite. I guess we can get to that, why it's the Semite and not just the Oriental. But I think that's it. Mr. Salzborn, who's Professor Salzborn, who was one of our anti-Semitism, sorry, that was a Freudian slip, anti-Semitism delegates of Berlin. He's also a professor, said, I think it was 2019, he Twittered, all these people, they love Twitter. He Twittered, if you are on the train and you hear someone next to you bringing up the word Palestine out of no particular reason, it is time for you to either start screaming, to get off the bus or start screaming and then hashtag anti-Semitism, right? Holy shit, exactly. That is completely normalized. That is not like there is nothing publicly that literally stands against that to shame this person into racism. No, right? This is why I'm also against this narrative of shame, because these people are not ashamed. There's no shame to even claim that the Jewish Voice for Peace are not really Jews. There's no shame about that. There's, Jewish Voice for Peace had their bank account canceled. Barely anyone knows about that. Yes. Why not? This is the first time since the Third Reich, actually, that Jews get their bank accounts canceled. Right. And no one of the people in power who kind of push this discourse says anything about it.
Yeah, the idea, the idea is that the war on terror and the war on anti-Semitism at some point, I mean, you even give it like a historical outline in your piece about how that actually developed, at least in Germany, since the 2000s.
Yes.
And how these two strands actually became, or worked in the same way, or worked together, or merged, how you say.
Right. So what is not in this piece, and what I didn't work on back then was the 90s, or only partially. But this narrative for Germany really builds up in the 90s, in fact, but then becomes, this article is a piece about when it actually becomes an institutionalized policy discourse. So all of these kind of ideas, tropes, fantasies have been lingering on and on and on for, you can actually go back into colonial times when it comes to Zionism, for instance, right? Or anti-Semitism, whatever. But what essentially happened, what I looked at, is that in 2000, there's a couple of things that happened, right? So we've got the second Intifada that broke out, which brought considerable political pressure by a European public, in fact, on European heads of states and parliaments and policymakers, basically. And there have been reports that kind of tackled, oh my God, how come so many Europeans think that Israel is a threat to peace in the Middle East, for instance, right? So that is one part. The Intifada. The second one is then 1 year later. Obviously, you have 9/11.
Yes.
And then this entire war rhetoric starts, right? And we grew up with that, right? I mean, this is like literally our time. And very quickly, also back then, right? The Palestinian, I don't know if you remember, there was this reporting which eventually was taken back again, but there was a footage from Palestine, from somewhere,
this
where
woman
apparently
that was celebrating or something like that.
Yeah, right? An entire crowd of people were just celebrating, and I don't know what the actual context was. I don't remember anymore what it actually was about, but it was literally just a fabricated story. Something else happened. People were celebrating for something very different. And that was just pushed by the media as, look, the Palestinians are,
right.
For the Twin Towers falling. that is where we, I think, see internationally speaking already the convergence. And in Germany, that just really fell along with a considerable pro-Israeli stance that needed to justify itself, I think, to my mind. But also, and a lot of people don't think that, or right now the critics that I hear once in a while, they say, oh, all of these, it's German politics, it's like a top-down approach. No. Everybody in Germany, not everybody, but a large population of people already believed that fighting anti-Semitism against a considerable new population of Muslims and Arabs, that was not something new. Like Orientalism, right, is already a lot longer than that. So there was already this idea of the original anti-Semite being the actual Semite. Funnily enough, right? That's how you kind of break it down. And that was then merged. So it wasn't completely only from like state, like from top down, basically state sanitized discourse. That is what it is, what it came to unfold in 2000 really. But that is not how it came into beginning. But basically these two things, along with the debate around citizenship rights, and who belongs to Germany. Because until then, we had one of the most regressive citizenship laws in Europe, in fact, where you could only become German based on your, blood heritage.
Yeah.
Right? And sure, you can ask for asylum, and there's always like exceptions, but that was the citizenship law, and that was changed in 2000 as well. So we see in 2000 three things happening. Internationally speaking, we have the Intifada, which kind of brings back this debate of colonialism. A lot of people, especially in the global South, identify with Palestinians, sure. Right? Then on the other hand, we have the so-called radical Muslims, Osama bin Laden and co. And today we have another doubling of that with ISIS. We have these modern contemporary forces of Islamists who then fly into the Twin Towers in New York. And then at the same time in Europe, we have citizenship debates. In Germany in particular, but we see the same difficulties or the same debates unfolding in France, also around the year 2000, where France also needs to tackle and kind of understand its considerable large post-colonial population, which is considerably large, Black and Muslim. Mm-hmm. Right? So still living in the banlieue without a post office.
Sure.
But a police station. I think these three things really just came together and then brought about this very organic mishmash of things. It's not like someone defined it or wanted it. It just kind of fell into place like a jigsaw, like a puzzle.
Right. And I mean, at the end of the article, you finish with an allegory. And interestingly, you talk about Rachel Dolezal.
Yeah.
And you describe a move similar to making a white person the subject of anti-Black racism, such as making Rachel Dolezal Black. Imagine you live in a country where non-Jewish Christians are the victim of anti-Semitism. What do you mean by that? Can you explain this?
I'm working on continuing this narrative about Rachel Dolezal, who today has some Nigerian name, I think. I was quite interested in her persona back then when this whole brouhaha around her person started. And I found it quite comparable to Germans. When you look at Rachel's life, she was quite a traumatized child, in fact. Her white parents adopted, I think, 2 Black children. They were quite violent, emotionally abusive. So Rachel, I think, from a very early age on, identified with Blackness. Why can you identify with Blackness in a US-American context? Well, obviously, because there is a narrative in society, at least by now, it doesn't mean that structurally speaking things are different or have changed, but there is a narrative that Black people are the victims of racism, right? And if you are of a victim position in society, that gives you actually a leverage and a possibility to speak, right? At least this is, I think, I think this is what made, unconsciously, I think, Rachel, plus, obviously the proximity to her Black siblings, choose Blackness as a way out to kind of defer and rechannel, re-narrate her own trauma and become quite an outspoken activist for Black people.
So,
and it's
so
not
Rachel,
that what she says is wrong, actually. You know, when you listen to her, it's not like she was any, you know, actually she was quite, I mean, I don't know. It's not what she said, right? It's that she actually, until the end, stated, I'm Black.
Right.
And I think that, and I remember, sorry for interrupting you, but I remember seeing her debating in at a university, and then she's saying, well, you know, we can define Blackness in different ways, which is true, right? What is Blackness at the end of the day, other than the invention of the white man? It can be seen as a metaphor for something, as a structural metaphor, right? So as Palestinians, you can be Black, or, you know, like in a more Fanonian sense. Or it can actually tackle something philosophically, a strain of thought, right? Black radical thinking, or you actually are Black, right? Somatically speaking. Yes. All right. So she chose the easy way out, in a way. She's like, you're Black if you believe in Malcolm X. Mm-hmm. Right? And if you somehow argue that narrative, which she then did, right? And now we have new phenomena of that. This British guy who just transformed himself into a Korean, I forgot his name now.
I also don't know his name.
Whatever their name, sorry, I think their name, it's non-binary. Their name. And he also says, look, I'm Korean now. I look like a Korean now. I studied the language. I love Seoul and kimchi, I don't know. And now he's Korean, that's it. And I think the same narrative, that is what I find quite interesting. This parasitic whiteness that Toni Morrison very well described, a lot of Black radical thinkers have described already, is exactly what we're seeing for Germany right now.
How? Like, where is the parallel? You're saying that Germans are acting... They are cosplaying being Jews, or what are we? Where is the comparison? I mean, the cosplaying actually does happen with the kippah and all this stuff. I mean, we actually saw that literally, but how like
maybe you want to explain that too. I mean, it's kind of common.
There were on when was that? I think in 2014 during the last. Well, the biggest onslaught on Gaza, there were these guys that would go to demos, German guys, dedicatedly non-Jewish, but would wear the kippah as a sign of solidarity. Or I think it even happens after some kind of attacks in the streets of Berlin on some people that actually were not Jewish, but dressed up as Jewish.
Yeah.
And then that became a whole thing, right? So, but I think that is not all that you're talking about, right? So you mean something else also.
I do mean that. I think we do see this also since the 2011-12. That's a thing since the 2010ers onwards, in a way that it becomes a structural thing where we actually have I think the first largest mass demonstration in Berlin.
There he goes.
You see, this is why Hal couldn't.
I knew he would come down.
Yeah.
Yep. Hug him.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh. You see Angela Merkel really opening it up in front of the Brandenburger Gate, or like behind it, or like on the side of it, and everybody was interpolated to wear a kippah. This is 2012,
right?
And at the same time, you had people with full, riot gear, snipers, literally, like guarding that demonstration, right? So you see a lot of power, and the state has the prerogative to impose violence, right? And that is used, right? So you see these snipers, and it's like the first time really that I saw as a German citizen such a public and open display of guys sitting on a car, I mean, in Israel, you see that, or in the US, the RoboCops in the US do that too. It's very threatening. But I wasn't used to that from a German public, right? And where you can see that, other than maybe, the G20 summit in Hamburg, which also restructured, I think, or unstructured the radical left and completely surveilled it after that, or before that even. But especially around the subject, especially around this topic, there are people bringing up guns. They become very, very violent.
Yes.
So yeah.
So we've been talking a lot about.
Oh no, I didn't answer it. So I would actually go as far as saying that yes, it becomes very much a trope, like Rachel Dolezal. Because we do see Germans by now telling Jews, I mean, this is also a long story and happened a long time ago already, that they're not real Jews or that they know better, right? So at the end of the day, you need to ask yourself, and there was even a demonstration in Neukölln where this also German lady who before that had tattoos of like Hindi tattoos, and she had white dreads and all of that stuff. And then she started, discovering her Jewishness. How does she discover her Jewishness? Jewishness has been kind of emptied from any kind of, let's say, theological definition even, or orthodox definition, or anti-Zionist definition. Today, Jewishness is narrated for these white people as a Zionist.
It's a political...
As political Zionism. Right. And then you see this lady who has a wig. She has like a curly wig.
Crazy.
That she puts on her head. A curly wig. I mean, this is like
More
Rachel Dolezal exactly braiding her hair.
Yeah, but
That's
Rachel
exactly
Dolezal was more like, she even passed, Rachel Dolezal, at least people were like, okay, I think many people actually believed she was part black.
Yeah, of course. And she also continued braiding after
that,
after she lost all the jobs, because apparently she can, she works quite well with with an afro. Anyways, bottom line being, I think that is exactly, to my mind, or very similar dynamics we can observe in Germany, where you then have these Germans that until then we would kind of make fun about because, it's another tattoo written wrong, or, your dreads just look really bad or something like that. But now they actually have a legitimacy even in public, and they go wear these wigs, put a kippah on the wig, wave an Israeli flag along with the rainbow flag, and then they march through Neukölln demonstrating against anti-Semitism, guarded by police, right? So that is something where I'm like, okay, how come you speak for Jews right now? They're speaking for Jews. And she's actually also, and now I'm dropping the next bomb. I know this is not, I'm going to have a lot of enemies after this, but she's converting. She's converting, I think in 2017, this particular woman started the conversion process at a famous synagogue, not Orthodox, synagogue in Berlin. And now it gets even spookier, I think, when we look at a lot of institutions that deal with anti-Semitism, including the Jewish Museum or any other, you gotta, I don't know, you need to magnifying glass to find a Jew working there,
Okay. You're already starting this a bit. Let's talk a little bit about the consequences of this war on anti-Semitism. So, what we see here in Germany, there is a short response that you give to Lentin's book, which is called Why Race Matters, in a journal for ethnic and racial studies. And you write that the same country that once prided itself with being experts in anti-Semitism is today the country that prides itself being experts in anti-Semitism. So because then you quote that we have like 14 federal state anti-Semitism delegates and we have 16 states, by the way. So
it's almost done.
And there is like this anti-Semitism delegate of the government, that is Dr. Felix Klein, special representative of the Foreign Ministry of Anti-Semitism and Jewish Organizations. And you also say that, and this is also something that you look at your piece here, is how this kind of anti-Semitism and the war on anti-Semitism has become institutionalized and crazy institutionalized also. So what does all this then mean for someone like you who's actually researching on the ground, who's trying to actually go into this discourse and also challenge some of the discourses there. So how do you experience, I would be interested in you just explaining a little bit from your personal perspective how you personally have experienced all these developments and this institutionalization of the war against anti-Semitism.
I think the first thing that I would like to say about that is it started well before the BDS hysteria, that people would be disinvited.
When would you locate the BDS hysteria? When did that start? 2015? Or?
In Germany?
Yeah.
You could see it already in certain public debates and stuff since 2012, 13.
Okay.
I think that's when we see more and more. And then, yes, and then it becomes actually a publicly known debate from 2015 onwards. I think the so-called refugee influx
that kind of amplified it.
It pushed the discourse, right? It was kind of like an acceleration of events, or for this kind of conservative policy. Before that, it was already, I mean, I've been disinvited 2009 already.
Cancelled.
Sorry, right. Cancel culture, whatever that means too. Anyways, but yeah, I mean, this whole conundrum around BDS, and in the beginning, actually, when people pointed out, oh yeah, now we're being targeted as BDS, I was like, yeah, just one of the many tropes.
Right.
Just one of the many tropes, whatever, because I was still with my Islamism and the anti-Semitism and with Ahmadinejad, and, you know, like I was still busy with that, and BDS kind of happened on the side. And then a couple of years fast forward, it's the main locus of attack, literally, right now. Like this is how race or any kind of stigmatization works, right? It needs to find the smallest common denominator so that everyone can agree, right? So this is now BDS. Before that, it was like the crazy Islamist and stuff like that. But BDS really propelled, although again, not saying BDS did that, right? But BDS really fueled that debate. And I think the reason why it did that is because it is actually a mass movement, a global mass movement, predominantly led, at least in Palestine as well, by women. Globally speaking, it is intersectional, and it connects people from all over the world behind a certain, you know, understanding of decoloniality. And it is peaceful. I don't necessarily know if, you know, working with and through the law will be the way out, but that's another discussion. And I think that became just very threatening. So in Germany, again, that discourse fit quite well with this idea of the Nazis boycotting Jewish shops, right?
Right.
This is the
Kauf
other.
Nicht bei Juden.
Genau. This is the only other boycott that Germans apparently remember. They don't even. I don't know. I mean, they don't even remember that, you know, Jews, U.S. American Jews, have asked to boycott Nazi Germany, and that is why the Nazis were boycotting the Jews, right? This is also kind of canceled. This is the actual cancel culture. I think this is the actual, like the partial and willfully neglected part of history. That is actually the cancel culture upon which everything else is built. So whatever memory politics means, it means to only look at things in a very selective way, right? Anyway, so this has kind of merged and now is unfolding in this realm, in this way. Yeah.
So you already mentioned that you were quite cancelled. So yeah. I would say you're like one of the most cancelled persons that I know. Like, can you explain a little bit like what happened and also
yes,
like even I think you're struggling right now with,
I'm struggling definitely. I mean I'm just smiling right now, but it's actually quite sad. Or it's not that easy, let's put it that way. Yeah, I mean I'm not getting jobs anymore in this country. In a world where everyone is Googling you before they interview you for a job, you'll find a lot of terrible articles about me that, you know, put me, and then again, you know, this is where these things come together, like where I'm supporting Islamism, secret files are being sent around.
The anti-Semitic Islamist sexist. That's me. Basically what's written in that funny file of yours. What's this file? Can you, like, I know that you can't talk so much about this because there's actually a process going on, but can you like disclose something about this with us?
I mean, like, let's stick with the question before that first. I think in the beginning it was just very, very German public shaming, and kind of behind closed doors on email list servers, people would like tear me apart or what I wrote journalistically. Basically. And then you would be disinvited again or canceled for the class on post-colonial feminism, for instance, you know, because apparently I'm propagating that Israel, I'm apparently saying that Israel is poisoning the wells in Gaza, something like that. I don't know.
Like literally, not metaphorically. Like
yeah,
okay.
I don't know how they meant it because I never wrote that.
Yeah.
You know, but when I I can only guess. You know, like you like people then forwarded me these email discussions on a listserv of an left-wing organization. Right? No one talks to you. Yeah. No one is asking you, and that is very, very kind of symptomatic of what is happening today. Right? It's very Kafkaesque. Mm-hmm. Very, very Kafkaesque. It's kind of like, you know, Kafka who writes, you know, like, okay, and then one morning they're just coming and picking him up, and he doesn't know what he did. It's exactly like that. No one discusses with you. No one tells you. They're all just debating amongst each other how anti-Semitic Anna-Esther Younes is.
And you're learning this by leaks, basically.
And I'm learning it by leaks, and I'm calling it ghosting by now. Mm-hmm. No one confronts you with it. Mm-hmm. And then you're just, I actually filed a lawsuit against this, against this institution, and wanted my 300 euros back, which I also got back actually, because they didn't want to go to court.
Right.
They didn't want to go to labor court with that, because obviously it's a bit embarrassing to kind of tell a judge, well, you know, this lady is bringing up anti-Semitic stereotypes from the Middle Ages. Mm. When, you know, you actually read the article that I wrote, and I don't know how many footnotes there are on each page, right? This is how neurotic you become at the end of the day, to kind of, and you only, and you don't even cite Palestinians. The only time when I cited Palestinians, I was still quite young, was the critique of the PA. Right. That's when I quoted Palestinian sources, you know, so it's completely ridiculous. So I was really looking forward to this court case play out, but then they were just like, okay, yeah, we paid the 300 euros by, and that is 2009. Mm-hmm. Or 2010, one of the two. And yeah, I mean, this is something. Oh no, it wasn't 2009. It was 2010, I think. Yeah. But these are the things that already happened before. What else happens? I mean, there's this file that I just talked about, which recently was also leaked. I mean, 2 years ago by now, almost, was also leaked to me. That literally takes my scholarship out of context. And I think this is also something that we see, structurally speaking. They take your words, whatever you say, whatever you write, out of context. They say things like, you know, when you in one interview I said, you know, like international dispossession, rape, expropriation, and expulsion, everything that happened and still happens in Palestine in 1948 until today, actually is, according to international law, understood as a crime against humanity, or as crimes against humanity. It's written in international law, right? What do they make out of it? Oh, Mrs. Younes says Israel's establishment was a crime against humanity, right? So now imagine this being posted over and over again.
So let me get this straight. They take like quotes, single quotes from your texts, then they put their own comments on top and say how they interpret this, basically, and make a file out of this. And this file then gets sent around to different institutions, telling them, if you want to invite Anna-Esther Younes, be aware that she is that, right? This is how this works?
That is how it works. Mm-hmm. But it's not just me, right? I mean, people, like, we see this kind of, it's a very concerted strategy of, again, it's very Orwellian, very George Orwell. You say one thing, and then we turn it around, give it a different meaning, and then you actually become the Islamist, right? For instance. Right. So I wrote about the women's movement in Hamas in 2010. That was published 2010. I don't even remember anymore what I wrote, to be honest. But I do remember what I wrote about. And I'm religiously quite unmusical. I'm definitely not, you know, someone who would support or even justify a religious, authoritarian almost, you know, kind of rulership. But yet I asked a very post-colonial feminist question: how come political Islam ever since the post-colonial time in the 60s and 70s, has mobilized the majority of women, whereas any other, left-wing organization wasn't able to do that. That was the whole article. Out of that, they're making, I'm a supporter of Hamas, and I'm a supporter of sexism. Right. And this is, again, where we see these tropes coming together. People take you out of context, not just me, everyone. This is how it happens. Out of context, they focus on one thing with which they stigmatize you. And then this war, actually, happens on social media. It happens on the internet. That's it.
In the comments of this video afterwards, I guess.
And in the comments of this video, exactly. You are taken down.
Here's to being cancelled. There you go.
Here's being cancelled. It's this other domain, like it's not our material reality here. It is this material reality that structures and forms people today, which is the internet. And it is very vicious because no matter where I apply in Germany, I'm sure people Google you, and the internet doesn't forget, right? And all of these articles are legitimate. I also became quite good in media law by now, actually, So, and in 2017 we had a redrafting, a changing, and even more an expansion of the freedom of expression in Germany, right? Which basically now makes it possible to call you a fascist, a Nazi, calls women, like this, what was her name? Like the woman from the Linke in Berlin who was attacked publicly in very sexist ways. And the judge said, well, it's freedom of opinion. If you're a public persona, that's the argument. If you're a public persona, you have to be able to live with that. Mm-hmm. Right? Which kind of presents also this notion that sexism, racism, classism, whatever it is a question of opinion. It's not something that we have historically fought for. People died for this. Women got their heads chopped off for not being called a slut in public, right? Or not having the right to vote. And now this is again kind of put into this domain of, oh well, let's just discuss this. Where's the capitalist, right? It was like going, oh no, we just discuss now, slavery and racism and the right. This
is just a matter of opinions. I get it.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this means for you, I mean, you can't work, you can't really speak. So what's your consequence?
No, of course I can speak. I sit here, I speak with you, and it's not.
I mean, you don't get platformed, let's say it like this, or you get platformed less. That's what I meant. And we platform you, of course. But
that's why you're so cool.
What's your consequence there? So how are you dealing with this? What are you going to do next?
I'm gonna continue publishing and getting on their nerves. Mm-hmm. In English. I'm not going to do this in German anymore. The right-wing fascists are all communicating in English, so we should do that too, actually, which doesn't mean that people should not also have these debates in German. I'm not saying that. I think I will need to find another way of income, definitely, in Germany. One that is completely unrelated to anything that I've done so far, because I'm just stigmatized and branded as impossible. I mean, recently I was unhired again for an academic job. I was really happy. I thought, okay, the time is over. I'm not being boycotted anymore. Now I can get an academic job. And then I was told on the phone after the contract didn't arrive, and I was wondering where this contract is. And then, this professor, this Karen professor, tells me on the phone, quite literally, that, Anna, if we hire you, so there's been a discussion without me, again, same thing, right? Everybody was discussing about whatever, I don't even know about what. She just said, you've been put in relationship to a BDS event. I'm like, which one?
Right.
Which BDS event? Like, I even want to know which BDS event have I been put in relationship with. Doesn't matter. It's enough that someone accuses you. And then they've been having apparently, debates for weeks, within the consortium and the people, the money lenders, money givers and all that. And they decided, or she decided, that is what she says, I'm now quoting from her, if we hire you, our structures will be destroyed, our funding will be taken away, the institution will be destroyed. and the project will be destroyed. You know, essentially, I'm calling Godzilla to invade the university.
You should have answered. Okay, so when can I start?
Exactly. It's like, when can I start? Yeah, I mean, and then she finishes this whole thing off. It's kind of like a very slow execution, and then at the end of the torture, you're shot in the head. Thank God. You know, at least it's over then. And then she says, "Look, if we hire you, Anna, we would need to use all of our resources that we have to justify your hiring in public."
Okay.
Right? And so that was the headshot. Obviously, Karen will continue with her anti-racist project, right? The person that kind of wanted me or kind of proposed to me that, you know, this might be a good fit, who knows my scholarship, stuff like that, also ghosted me after that. Right. People literally just ghost you. Mm-hmm. They just disappear as though you are this, you know, cholera infested, toxic person. Mm-hmm. I'm referring to Kafka. I mean, I'm sorry, this is really like die Verwandlung, you know? It's right. And everybody just looks at Gregor, you know, in this other room and just really hopes that he just vanishes. They don't understand what he is, but he just leave and die, you know, and then everything is good again. And this is exactly what is happening today. And people are scared as fuck.
Yes, definitely.
So those people who actually could speak back, who could fill this ideological vacuum and this ideological erasure, which is happening. Dirk Moses has said that recently in one of his op-eds. It is ideological erasure. So we do not have the possibility. We can speak, sure, we can have our own podcast and stuff like that. It's very... You
know what? I mean, it's not... I mean, I am not an academic scholar. I don't work in this field. I think I will not have these, like, not even remotely come close to the kind of repercussions that you are suffering through. Mm-hmm. But even for me, like when we started doing this podcast, and we then, after a couple of months, started doing Palestine, Israel for the first time, I could feel that fear myself, and I'm not...
sorry, go ahead. Hulk Hogan is beating up the policeman, sorry.
I am not someone that... I'm not someone that normally is afraid to talk about this in public, but the moment that I went live the first time with this Palestine roundtable that we had, I realized that I'm genuinely scared. Mm-hmm. Scared to speak and scared to go public.
And
scared to go on record.
What are you scared of? Let's talk about this.
I try to understand that myself, and it was just like I have internalized myself as someone that I think is politically quite conscious, at least for certain topics. Mm. I have internalized in myself that we do not talk about this. Mm-hmm. This is not something that we talk about in public. You talk about this in close groups, and even in those groups there could be snitches, and you should take care and all the stuff, you know. So, and that's to be honest, that's also not only coming from the Germans. I mean, this is also something that already the generation of my father has internalized from coming here, you know. So, yeah. So, I mean, I can only imagine how that must feel for someone that actually where his or her whole career depends on these kind of mechanisms. And for me, that is not the case. It was just a stupid podcast that can go offline tomorrow and no one cares, you know. So, yeah. I
mean, but what I would like to say to that, and when you said that, it's not that I wasn't aware of that when I started, but I was very naive. I thought, well, first of all, I wanted to write about something completely different in my PhD. I wanted to write about a non-existent Palestinian youth movement in Germany. And then I realized, okay, if I give away all of the knowledge, because this is an under-researched population, then everyone will read it. And then everyone has these information, which is why also over the course of time, I really changed my research and methodological approach. I don't research down anymore. I don't research the other anymore. I research people in power. That is something. And at home, I also don't need to go somewhere else to do that, really. We constantly go somewhere else and then come back and write crazy books about Africa or the Middle East. And then, you know, you become like a celebrity over here. Anyways, I was very naive. I changed my topic within the first year because I did some preliminary interviews and I realized, look, it doesn't really matter what I'm going to write about this non-existent Palestinian youth movement because everybody just talks about fear and the fear of being labeled as an anti-Semite. And then I realized, okay, I need to write about that. And then I thought, okay, it's academia. I'm doing my PhD. I mean, I paid my dues. I have my credentials, like I'm not stupid, I thought, I really actually believed that was very naive in this very liberal notion of
that you can move something there.
Higher education, right? That, if your argument is sound, if you are just smart enough, right? If you've just read enough, blah, 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 people will at least listen to your argument. It's not true. And I learned this now, but I continued because it was so interesting, because eventually I was very personally caught up in it. And I even became like a scholar of anti-Semitism, although I'm still denying it until today because I was not interested in anti-Semitism.
Right.
Yeah.
I have two more questions because we are also
but what do you do with that fear then? So you still do, I mean, let's talk about this a little more, because I'm interested in that, because a lot of people do say, I'm losing my job, I have a family, and that's all legit, obviously, right? But what else? What else is there to fear, right?
For me, it's mostly the family part. There's also a consideration of employers, definitely, because I'm working as a wage laborer, and they Google you too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you overcome this? At some point with the podcast, I just said that solidarity or bust, because there were also certain, this is also something that is very personal to me, and I think this is, and I just from a very idealistic perspective, I think this is how the left should act. So I kind of felt it to be my obligation. But I can totally understand, like, for example, if someone like you would not speak about these topics because they are afraid to lose, you're kind of the proof that they will actually maybe have their whole career destroyed, right? Just by talking about that.
Right, but I think that's true, but I think the contradictions in the system, it's also this metaphor, that everybody says that there's a contradiction in the system. But I think we do live right now at a time where these contradictions surface anyways, all the time, right? The contradictions of capitalism, the contradictions of gender, of race, of all of that. And I think it just needs to become a lot more, or we need to talk about what happens to academics, to intellectuals, right? That critique a structure, right? I'm not critiquing fighting anti-Semitism, right? I'm critiquing the modalities under which, the convergences through which, and the goals of which this structure enables and puts in place. That is what I'm criticizing. I'm not against fighting anti-Semitism or any type of racism, in fact, quite the opposite. But if people like that, and I'm not the only one, are shunned, right? And politically, ideologically repressed, then I don't know what higher education is anymore, right? Yeah. Why do we go to university then? Then I can just, quite literally go to university, give you a couple of thousands of years, please give me my degree, and then whatever. Partially this is happening, right, in privatized state education or university education. But it just, it destroys us. It destroys scholarship. It just destroys science, right? And that people are not scared of that. And especially, whether we see this with the debates around the virus right now, or debates around climate change, right? We do see, since Donald Trump, it became quite clear that scientists are one of the many opinions. Right, and we need to tackle that. We need more people to speak out, to talk about that. Or else we just, destroy academia. That's that's a possibility too, or destroy our intellectual.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that also shows the borders of that liberal notion of academia, and the idea that you have in a capitalist system and a capitalist state, an academia that is really independent of ideological and political reproduction in the system is, from speaking as a Marxist, I think is not realistic. And thereby you will always have academia kind of reinforcing these kind of notions that hold up these power structures. And I think with Palestine, it's just the most obvious, because it's also, to be honest, just very sloppy. so out in the open, right? And so hysteric.
Yeah, it's hysterical.
Yeah,
definitely,
exactly.
It's hysterical. And you're right. I mean, the bourgeois function of academia is quite obvious.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
just putting that little bit out there. I mean, it's part of the ideological superstructure, they would say, right?
Yep.
And there is a reason why at least Marx analyzed it like this. But let's talk a little bit about one thing, and then we can maybe close this. We've been talking a lot about anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
But especially about fighting anti-Semitism and the structures that follow and
how it's used against the minorities. Yeah.
Right. But what about the real anti-Semitism? Like, is this something? How should we actually approach this then? Because it is, in fact, I mean, even if we don't look at the minorities that are coming here and we refute the fact that this is somehow imported as a problem, there still is an anti-Semitic problem in this country.
Mm-hmm. Big time, definitely. I mean, I think people who can put curly wigs on their heads and not find that weird and speak for Jews or Israelis that is deeply anti-Semitic or philo-Semitic, whatever you want to call it, I guess. I think what appeared to me after a couple of years, and even more now, is that I learned a lot about a discourse that literally inverts the logic of anti-racism. And projects the actual problem or the culprit kind of issue onto those who don't profit from the structure, in this case, Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims and refugees. But then what does happen to the Jewish subject, right? What happens actually? So essentially what it does, it uses anti-Semitism to define who belongs to Germany and who's not, right? This isn't the expulsion of the other through you're the racist, you're the sexist, you can't live in Europe, right? But what happens to anti-Semitism? And that's a good question, because the more I deal with that and the more I understand what is happening, I can say a lot about how it affects the Muslim, the Arab, the refugee, right? Or the POC scholar or whatever. But the definition of anti-Semitism is vanishing more and more.
It actually doesn't have that much to do with that anymore, right? The
no,
conversation
and it's
is not...
also, we don't know what anti-Semitism is anymore, really. I mean, so on the one hand, right now, I mean, me at least, I think I'm understanding anti-Muslim racism better and better and better through this research. But then again, I'm looking at actual anti-Semitism and we don't know. You know, we can say general statements. It's, hatred against Jews, qua Jews. So what does that mean, right? What does that mean today? Because that is being used for a political Zionist agenda. So what I do observe is if people like the Jewish Voice for Peace, anyways, it's not really Jewish Voice for Peace, but the German version of it, are not real Jews anymore, according to also one of the anti-Semitism delegates of Baden-Württemberg, in fact. Then which Jew is actually a Jew? Right? And that's that is generally a German obsession. Even in the seminars that I observed, the majority of their neurotic hang-up was to figure out what Jewishness is. And the thing that freaked them out the most in terms of symbolisms is an Orthodox Jew, really. And I think there's now a lot to be said about Orthodox Judaism and liberalism, liberal Judaism, assimilation, the Haskalah, right? All these debates that happen in the past, which now are not apparently important anymore, but those Jews, the Orthodox ones, the anti-Zionist Jews, right? The queer Jews, whatever, everyone who folds into our fold, they're just as ideologically erased as this guy that told you on the beach at the age of 9 years that Palestine doesn't exist. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's the only thing that I can see, really, what happens with anti-Semitism, right? I mean, we have been ideologically erased already. Right now, what is happening with anti-Semitism is that it's this double move, right? It kind of co-opts the history, white genocide and colonialism, and then kind of renames it and uses it against a minority population inside of Europe. whilst at the same time, nothing about anti-Semitism really changed.
Yep, word.
And it's not only that it didn't change, in fact, but it did change, but we're not talking about it, right? So this kind of hollowing out of Jewish identity or what Judaism means, that's a discussion that Jews need to have, right? But this hollowing out through a political Zionist idea that is being taken up by a European, not taken up, actually, white Christians invented Zionism. But it was not Jews. But, that they actually weaponize that also against Jews now. This is really it's dangerous. It's really dangerous. And when I then go to demonstrations, for instance, and then someone says, oh, there's the Zionist press there, we need to run away, or I don't know, beat them up or something like that, right? That is exactly where you see these tropes coming together, namely, Zionism, although it was historically a European Christian Protestant invention, now again the Marxist double, it had its own materialized version of it through Israel, political Zionism and all that, now becomes a political force that apparently only Jews do, right? So when you Googled the other day, 2 weeks ago, for instance, I tried to Google how many Zionists there actually are in the Western world, particularly in the US. Apparently, I heard a notion of like 140 million or something like that. Right. 140 million Zionists or people who do believe in political Zionism. And, that's a lot more than there are Jews, obviously, right? A lot more. So who are these people? So I was, trying to Google it. Everything I could find. And I was literally, at the end of the day, I was literally typing it in as a question, like really Google-like. And they only gave me information on Jews, on American Judaism and the relationship to Zionism. Everything I could find was about Jews or Israelis, obviously, right? But I don't want to know what Jews think or what Israelis think, because bottom line being, this is a very small population and Jews have never had the chance or the possibility to actually rule, right? Israel is something else right now. But since when does the white man in Europe care about what Jews think? That's just unless you are an anti-Semite and you think they're controlling politics. Sure. So you don't see this anymore, right? So this is the convergence of Judaism with Zionism. So in the end, what I find very difficult, or dangerous, next to the hollowing out of Jewish identity, and we don't really know what, or white people know better what a real Jew is than Jews, we do see this convergence between Judaism and Zionism. Ella Shachar has written about that already before, which is dangerous because actually the majority of people who are Zionists are Christian fundamentalists.
Right. Okay.
That's that, And all of these anti-Semitism delegates are all very good Protestants, most of them. Even Katharina von Schnurbein on the EU level, oh my God, I'm going to have so much problems after this. But everybody is a convinced Protestant, and we need to say it. We need to say this, That is the responsibility.
We ain't got so many Jews in those.
No. And that is exactly the responsibility that we have. Actually, that's the actual responsibility we have, that we talk about that, this hollowing out, this parasitic taking over of Jewish identity, of it becomes a commodified form, just like Black scholars have written about Blackness already as a, Blackness as a thing. That's it. Yeah.
Now let's do a short outlook. So how is this going to develop? Omar Barghouti said recently, the founder of the BDS movement, said that, for example, that the recent backlash against Palestinian human rights activism that we especially saw in May during the latest onslaught in Palestine, that the way that media is reacting to this hysterically and basically escalating also its aggression against these kind of activists is a sign that we are winning. So it's a sign, just like in South Africa, that the resistance is becoming stronger and the future looks better. We're getting there, and it's basically the last striking out before the fall. How do you feel about that? Do you think so too?
No. I truly appreciate Omar's intellectual mind and also as a person, and I think it's very important to say these things, to stay hopeful, especially in his position as someone who's representing a movement in a way to the outside. And he's an incredible public speaker, right? And he cannot go to the US anymore, right? He's banned. So it is important to keep up hope. I'm very bad at that. I'm more of a pessimist, maybe.
Yeah, me too.
And also because I don't just see it as the single issue thing. I think that is important. Like if you're an activist, or which I think I am too, in a different way, you need to give people hope, and you need to have the single issue narrative, right? Palestine, Palestine, Palestine. I do see these tropes of what we just discussed right now, not just being ushered against the Palestinian movement for human rights. I see it, against the ecological movement. I see it against people who, right now concerning the virus want to, spread some information. So there is a certain kind of structure in place that I find very, very scary. We have on the EU level more and more cooperation. I mean, also since the 90s. On economic and military, on the economic and military level with Israel. I mean, Israel literally can try out all these funky weapons and then sell them. That is a big thing, actually. Like you can actually say they've been combat proved.
Yes.
And the convergences that we see happening. Right. On the one hand, we have all these, Black Lives Matter and pro-Palestine demos now, at least recently, which is wonderful to see that the street is revolting in a way, or like showing itself. On the other hand, everybody's scared. And we can look at it from two perspectives. Social movement theory, true. There's more and more people mobilizing. There's more and more debates. There's more, But as an anti-capitalist, predominantly and primarily, who owns the means of production? Who is the capital, right? That's it. Who actually owns the media, right? This is why what you're doing is really important, and we need a lot more of that. Who owns politics? Who owns the media? Who owns all of these structures that essentially define and determine if you can, as a movement, bring about change? And I don't know, last time I was in Palestine, I always come back completely depressed. I don't know how you feel. I'm completely depressed. And because it just gets worse and worse and worse. And this network of everyday apartheid and colonialism becomes more and more enshrined, also in the psyche of the people, right? There's something, this is really important, And speaking of South Africa, I really hope we don't end up like South Africa. That is another thing. Like the law, from a Marxist perspective, you're all these funny Marxists here, comes in after you are dispossessed, right? After the capitalists or the feudal lords at that point have taken the land, have taken the resources, and then they torture you into, whatever, working for them. And then they give you the possibility to maybe, this is again something that people had to then fight for, right? Then you get the possibility to maybe appeal and ask for more laws and more rights, right? Then we enter into this rights discourse. And that is the trap, and this is exactly what we're seeing. So wherever we will end up, BDS needs a good anti-capitalist critique. We cannot just speak about the law and some, international or human rights law or international humanitarian law, both. That's all legit and fine. But we also need to talk about is the restructuring of resources, of land, because otherwise we end up like Namibia and we end up like South Africa, and then Steve Biko would kind of turn around in his grave when he wrote, "I write what I like." Sure.
I mean that. Ultimately, it comes down to understanding Palestine in a greater context of. It's not an isolated case. And thereby cannot be solved isolatedly. You might get something like in South Africa, which is like at least a formal and a representative change in the sense of we're not calling our system apartheid anymore. But you're not actually changing the relations of production there much. I mean, formally, yes, the law is different, but the relations of production are pretty much the same. And if you don't touch this, And there's also another question which bears is how much can you actually change the relations of production, let's say in South Africa, without also changing them somehow in a global way, right? And that's also where my pessimism comes in most of the time. Yeah, so I share that, definitely.
Right.
I am not so enthusiastic because of the obvious growth of popular movements. Mm-hmm.
Why not?
Because ultimately, I mean, it does grow, and that gives me a good feeling and makes me feel warm inside many times to see many people support us. But ultimately, what we need to figure out is how we overcome these things, and we won't do this just by protesting.
Right, and like we talked about this demonstration, the Pride, just that happened. Not this weekend, the weekend before that, right? And I think what I found quite fascinating walking there. And not only that, everybody was very much pro-Palestine and pro-Black Lives Matter, which is the first time that I've ever seen anything like that. Mm-hmm. Especially, like, I almost started crying again. Mm-hmm.
And that matters. I mean,
and that matters. And
yeah,
everybody's beautiful. It was great. Right. You know, like it was just. But then, you know, like the police literally ushered us through the street. I mean, you could literally turn around at some point. You know, we rested. You know. Drank a little bit, and then all of a sudden we found ourselves at the end of the demonstration, and the cops were already there. Like, mm-hmm. So, and then the next couple of days after that, right?
All the backlash.
And what do you see? I mean, people literally were snatched out from that demo,
right?
By cops. The people responsible for the microphone informed us about that, but didn't give us any background as to why what is going on, right? So it just, I mean, it was very surreal in many ways, I think. And then the next day you have all this media backlash that says, you know, there was a lot of hostility towards the media, which kind of puts the queer pride, the queer international of color decolonial pride, into the same corner, like Corona deniers.
Yeah, Querdenken, basically. Yeah, exactly.
Like Corona deniers and fascists.
As if they said Lügenpresse or something like that.
Exactly. As though they said that. And, you know, these things, like people said, you know, the Zionist press is here and la, 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 you know, which was not the smartest thing to do, as I said already before, because that, again, no one understands white people as the Zionist press, right?
Right.
Or white Christian Protestants, but Jews. So yeah, I mean, I'm shocked. I don't know how people can just twist and turn an entire beautiful queer pride to the extent where we are literally like the Corona deniers. Yeah.
And on that sour note,
yeah.
Anna.
Yes.
Thanks a lot for a very interesting talk.
Yes.
For being here, and let's see how cancelled we get.
Yes, very cancelled after this.
And we will talk to you soon for sure.
Thank you for inviting me, and please donate to this wonderful podcast.
Yes, please. Thank you guys. Auf Wiedersehen, Leute. Wir sehen uns bald. Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Und zwar als allererstes, folgt uns bitte überall, wo ihr uns folgen könnt. Wir sind auf YouTube, auf Facebook, auf Twitter. Wir sind jetzt mittlerweile auch auf Twitch. Gebt uns
Instagram.
Instagram sowieso, genau. Gebt uns dort einen Follow. Liked dieses Video bitte. Überhaupt jedes Video, das ihr euch anschaut, bitte liken. Warum nicht? Ist doch einfach nur ein Klick da. Damit helft ihr uns ungemein. Wenn ihr uns abonniert auf YouTube, klickt auch die Glocke. Dann werdet ihr immer informiert, wenn wir live gehen. Dann könnt ihr dazukommen. Je mehr Leute live mit uns unterwegs sind, desto besser sind dann auch die Views und desto besser ist das für den Algorithmus. Wir haben außerdem ein Patreon-Konto.
Genau. Patreon.com/99:1. Wenn ihr so richtig dabei sein wollt, könnt ihr euch Membership-Level aussuchen. Wir haben 3 verschiedene Stufen. Es gibt dann solche Sachen wie zum Beispiel diese neuen Nachspielepisoden, wo wir jetzt die erste gemacht haben. Und ihr habt auch Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community. Weiters haben wir einen paypal.me/99:1 Link, falls ihr denkt, naja, sind schon schnaffte Typen, aber mehr als einmal will ich nicht zahlen, dann könnt ihr uns da auch ein bisschen Geld schicken. Wir haben tatsächlich inzwischen relativ signifikante laufende Kosten, weil wir einen hohen Qualitätsanspruch haben. Insofern, wir sind wirklich auf eure Unterstützung angewiesen an der Stelle.